Hi there, and thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Secrets of a Prodigy by Lynn Wood, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Maddie Nichols exited her boyfriend's Manhattan brownstone and quietly closed and locked the solid mahogany door. Her college boyfriend, Brendan, was still asleep. Lots of late nights recently studying for his exams. He was a second-year law student. She paused on the porch overlooking the mature tree-lined street and let her dark eyes sweep the chaotic scene spread out before her, while the rest of her senses soaked up the music and energy pumping off the city streets. The music came in the form of honking cars and taxi drivers yelling obscenities out their open windows at clueless pedestrians or other drivers, both of whom yelled back, their angry voices often accompanied by an obscene gesture in the direction of the driver of the cab. There was the familiar rumble of trucks heading on their way to or from deliveries, or simply passing through the busy streets of New York City on their way to other, lesser destinations. Street vendors hawked their often stolen wares while keeping a sharp eye peeled for police. The homeless, the drug dealers, the lost, the broken in mind and body, the wide-eyed tourists, the hard-driving, hard-living native New Yorkers contributed their own melodies to the symphony of the city, all of them, it seemed, focused on getting somewhere other than where they were. The pace of life in the city was scary fast. You either kept up or you got run over by those who could, and you became one of the lost or broken, or you accepted defeat and went back home, to wherever home was before you braved the streets of New York. A smile curved Maddie's lips as she tuned into the underlying rhythm of the city. Compared to some of the places she lived in her young life, New York seemed like the center of the universe. It was so busy, chaotic, and diverse with every race, religion, country of origin, language, sex, gender identity, the rich, the poor, and everyone in between represented. And loud. The city was loud. To a musician like Maddie, the energy was an inspirational charge for her music. Sometimes, when the noise and the lost and angry voices became too much for her overtaxed senses, she would retreat to an empty music room at the college or run through Central Park with her earbuds turned up to drown out the loud and in-your-face voices of one of the largest, most important cities in the world. She skipped down the stone steps, breathing in the warmth and promise of a delayed spring finally arriving in the city. Maddie wasn't sure where she'd be by summer. She was graduating in a few weeks and was still deciding where her next move would take her. The past 4 years were the best of her life. She had never lived so long in one place before. For Maddie, it meant she could put down even temporary roots, making more than just passing friends, even fall in love and have a boyfriend. The sheer happiness of her college years brought a wide smile to her face. The future, her very own future, was looking bright and promising. She had auditions lined up over the next few weeks with some of the most prestigious symphonies in the country, and already scored a few offers she was juggling and keeping in reserve. Maybe her future salary wouldn't cover the rent on a Manhattan brownstone, but she didn't care. The thought of being able to make a living doing something she loved was a dream she clutched close to her heart since childhood. Being on the cusp of realizing her dream was almost inconceivable to Maddie, considering the long, winding, and often painful road she took to get herself here. Music was the one constant in a life filled with a seemingly endless succession of transitions, temporary homes, and schools. She supposed her parents did their best, but their best did not extend to where she woke up most mornings. Brandon was the product of wealthy parents. Must be uber wealthy, she figured, if one of their sons was living alone in one of the family properties, as Brandon called it. She smiled, recalling some of the family properties she lived in with her parents over the past 2 decades. Not exactly pricey Manhattan brownstones with elegant furnishings, complete with matching plates and stemware, not to mention the cleaning crew that passed through regularly to restore order. Maddie stepped off the final step onto the sidewalk and turned into the direction of the school. A man in a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up over his head stepped away from the mature tree he was leaning against and approached her. "Juliet?" he asked in a low voice. Maddie almost jumped out of her skin. She was so lost in her daydream, she wasn't paying attention to her surroundings. How could she be so stupid? She was likely about to pay the price for her inattention and hopefully a demand for money, which she didn't have, and not a violent encounter. You, Juliet? The stranger demanded again. Maddie couldn't get a good look at his face, but frantically began taking in anything she could of his appearance. A few inches over 6 feet, muscular, white, no tattoos. She couldn't see the color of his hair under the hoodie. His eyes were brown, well-worn jeans, sneakers. Should she run? She ran track in high school. Just as she gave the possibility serious consideration, her brain kicked in. She raised her apprehensive glance to the stranger's expectant one. Yes, yes, I'm Juliet. Who wants to know? She responded to his question in a shaky voice. Got a message from the nurse, he told her. What's the message? In response to her question, Hoodie Man handed her the backpack he carried. Then he turned and set off in the opposite direction Maddie was heading before he faded into a sea of other pedestrians on the sidewalk. Maddie stood there, her heart racing, holding the backpack in a loose grip, tempted to let it drop to the ground and simply keep walking in the direction she was intent on before Backpack Man intruded on her morning and spoiled her carefree, happy mood. She realized she was shivering and looked up at the sky to see if the sun was still out or if a rogue cloud had blown in and left a chill in its wake the same way Backpack Man did. She was surprised to discover the sun still perched in its rightful place, lifting the moods of the city residents after a long, cold, dreary winter, followed by a wet, cold, dreary spring. Maddie gave herself a moment to get her bearings, letting old memories resurrect themselves. She figured she was entitled to her moment. When one's life was imploding, Maddie decided it was okay to give herself permission to gather herself, to remember her lines, recall how this next part went. Shaking herself out of her immobility, she drew a deep breath and unzipped the backpack Hoodie Man left with her. There was another, smaller pack inside. On top of the inner pack was an envelope. She reached for it, then seeing it was sealed, she slid the straps of the heavy backpack over her arm so she could open the envelope and retrieve the lone sheet of paper inside. There was a single, hurriedly scrawled word across it in her mother's still familiar handwriting. Run. Instinct kicked in, and long years of training and experience from a life lived on the run, at least until she landed in New York 4 years ago. It took her the first year to stop expecting to receive at some point during each day the note she was just handed by a stranger on a city sidewalk. Somewhere during the past 4 years, she allowed herself to begin believing her new life could be her real life. She let herself think normal was within her grasp and began making plans, immersing herself her senior year of college with dreams of what her future could hold. Stupid, stupid, idiot, she berated herself under her breath. She was apparently such an accomplished liar, she allowed herself to begin believing her own backstory. Gathering herself, Maddie calculated her next moves. It was too risky to return to her dorm to collect her relatively few belongings. There was enough cash in her account to get her through the next few months until she figured things out. Coming to a quick decision, Maddie set off in the direction of the closest subway stop. She would take a train to Penn Station. Flights left a trail. She needed to get away from New York, head west, since New York was about as east as she could get and remain in the United States. She hesitated at risking taking an overseas flight. There was a passport in her name, or the name she was currently using, but she wasn't sure it would pass inspection at TSA or customs at the arrival gate of her chosen destination. She carried it on her, never left home without it, but America was a big country. She knew how to fit into its various diverse cultures. She'd been playing hide and seek her entire life. Scanning the departures board at the station, Maddie decided on Chicago. It was west. A train was leaving within the hour. It was a big city, big enough to get lost in while she figured out her next move. After purchasing her ticket, she texted her roommate and told him a family emergency had come up and she was leaving the city, that she couldn't be sure she would make it back in time for graduation. Once she knew more details, she would be in touch. Not surprisingly, her phone rang almost immediately post-text. It was Pablo, intent on demanding a better explanation than the one she just provided for her disappearing act. She ignored the pleas of the harps announcing his insistence and let the call drop into voicemail. Then called the school and recited the same story. After completing steps 1 and 2, she left the station to give herself a little more space for step 3 and called Brendan. She figured after almost 4 years together, he deserved better than a text. Her train was pulling in by the time she got herself together enough to return to the station, then run through it to the tracks. Maddie hopped on the train just as it was beginning to pull away from the station. She found an empty window seat, sank into it, and leaned her head against the window. Closing her eyes, she blinked back the tears burning there. So much for the promise of her bright future. She knew better. She guessed she was out of practice. It was time to get back in the game.